Good morning. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. This webinar is produced by the Child Abuse Training and Technical Assistance Center, a project of the Center for Innovation and Resources in partnership with the Child Parent Institute. For those of you who can hear me, this might seem obvious, but I just want to remind everyone to turn on their speakers in order to hear the presentation. Use the Q&A feature to ask the presenter any questions that you may have. We will leave time at the end of the presentation for Monica to answer questions. Please keep in mind she will answer as many as she can in the 30 minutes that we have for the Q&A. The chat panel is where you can ask tech support questions. We will answer those immediately in this panel. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Monica Borunda is a bilingual licensed marriage and family therapist, adjunct faculty at CSULA, and a child forensic interview specialist and trainer and parent educator. She has been an invited speaker at conferences and workshops. In addition, Monica sees children, adults, and families in private practice in the city of Pasadena. Monica is currently serving on the board of the California Professional Society on the Abuse of Children. Now, if you'll bear with me a minute, I will switch controls over to Monica. And then Monica, you should be able to.
Okay, got it. I didn't know if it was done yet. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us today. So like Emma said, I'm a child forensic interviewer and trainer. I've been doing that for about 15 years, and I've seen a lot of children experiencing certain types of abuse that I think as parents, counselors, social workers, and just adults in their lives, we could do some things to help reduce or prevent completely what's happening to them. So today we're going to be talking about that. If you have little ones around, you might want to put on headphones because I don't know that you want them to hear everything we'll be talking about. All right, let's get started with this question. If you could put your answers in the chat, Emma will read them out loud. When you were a child, think back to when you were, I don't know, 5 or 10 or any time during childhood. What did you learn about sex, about sexuality? What were you told about any of those topics or child sexual abuse when you were a kid? So I'll give you a minute to do that and we'll go from there.
We already have a couple of people saying nothing at all. Actually, a lot of people saying nothing at all.
Yeah, that's such a common response. And with that, I think the follow-up question too, that is, what message did that give you about talking about these topics, right?
Yeah, it was, they all seemed to be nothing, and saying it seemed very hush-hush, that people didn't want to talk about it, and it was shameful to talk about.
Right. Yeah, it's very common. It's a lot of what I usually hear, or just very little. Maybe even no one should touch you, but that was all there was to it. But nothing is a big thing. Anything else?
Yeah, a lot of people say they kind of learned about the birds and the bees, but nothing about how to protect yourself, or anything like that. Okay. Or they were told to wait and not do anything until you're married.
Right. Okay. So with what you learned or didn't learn, were told or were not told, how did that impact your adult ability today to speak to children, yours or clients or kids you work with or are exposed to, about these topics, right? The first thing that we want to look at is our level of comfort in discussing these issues. I've interviewed hundreds, over 1,000 kids now who have been sexually abused. And I have to tell you that most of them say they didn't know this was wrong. They didn't know what to do once they found out it was wrong, and they felt alone. So I think it's really important, the role that we play in these children's lives. And we need to be first comfortable speaking about these issues, speaking about body parts and things like that, in order to convey that, in order to open up those lines of communication with children. Okay, anything else, Emma, or should we move on?
Yeah, it was a lot of the same. There were a few, their parents did talk to them about it, but I would say just a couple out of,
Okay.
100. So.
Yeah, usually that's what it looks like. Okay, so let's start with some statistics. They're pretty scary. They're pretty accurate as well. No matter where you look for statistics, the numbers hover right around this. Before a child turns 18, 1 in 6 boys will experience some form of sexual abuse, and 1 in 4 girls will experience the same. And to me, that is horrifying. That is way too much. And I know that we can do something about it to prevent it. The true statistics are very difficult to determine because child sexual abuse, especially if you don't know, you can't name it, you don't know what it is, and you don't know what to do, or you're told that this is normal, that this is a secret, that bad things are going to happen if you tell. A lot of child sexual abuse goes unreported. And experts agree that the incidence is far greater than what is reported to authorities or even families and friends. This is due to a lot of issues that we can go into, but we won't for today. In terms of parents, a lot of parents want to know what to teach their children about these topics, when to do it, how to talk to them about it. Many parents are also so uncomfortable talking to their kids about their bodies, as most of you have shared was your experience, or sexual abuse or sexuality, that they end up not talking to their children at all. And if they do, it's sometimes not enough, or it's not in a meaningful way that really helps children figure out and do something about it when it happens. A lot of parents are afraid that something like this will happen. I think that probably this is one of the reasons that parents are here today. And the other thing that is a huge misconception is that if something happens to my kid, something like this, they're going to tell me. Of course, they're going to tell me. And we know that that is not true. 1/3 of children do not tell during childhood at all. Another third of now adults who have experienced childhood sexual abuse will never tell in their lifetime. So we know that at about 1/3 of children tell what happened. And that leaves a huge number of them kind of being left alone to deal with it, and all the impact that this can have on their life and trauma and things like that. So it's really important to set up the conditions for children to tell us what happened if something does happen. So we need to give them the knowledge. This is what this is. These are what your body parts are called. There's no shame in calling your vagina a vagina, just like there is no shame in calling your nose a nose, or your elbow an elbow. And the other thing that we'll look at in a little bit is, aside from giving them knowledge, we need to help them develop their senses. And we'll get into that, so don't think about it too much right now. We also want to establish a pattern of communication between these children and the significant adults in their lives. And significant adults can be anybody that the child trusts: parents, other family members, teachers, counselors, any adult that has a role in a child's life, and that child trusts you, you're a significant adult. And they will sometimes say that 20 years later: I had this teacher, I had this counselor, there was this person that I really mattered to. So that's, we're all responsible for this. Okay, a few more statistics on childhood sexual abuse. Of those children who have experienced contact USA, contact childhood sexual abuse, because there's also non-contact. Some of those examples of non-contact would be being exposed to pornography, which happens more often than you would think. But of those who have experienced being touched, the average age of a first rape is under 11 years. 60% of first rapes occur before the age of 13. I'm not going to read all of these, but 30% of child abusers in this, child sexual abusers, are a male in the family. 20% are other relatives. And so about 10 to 11% of people who molest children are strangers. And while it's important to tell your child to beware of strangers and stranger danger and all of those things, we know that most children, about 90%, are not abused by a stranger. They're abused by someone that they know and someone that the family knows and trusts. Boys are usually a little older than girls at the onset of childhood sexual abuse. And the range is infancy to 18 years of age. Once people are sexually assaulted after 18 years of age, but then they're adults. I've seen infants as young as 10 months being sexually abused. And so it's important to know these horrifying statistics so that we, I think, are motivated to do something about it and try to prevent it. African American and Caucasian women have similar rates. For Asian women, it's somewhat lower. There may be reasons for the statistic around that. For Native American women, it's higher. And for Latinas or Latinos, they are at an increased risk for incest, which means incest by sexual abuse by a close family member. All right. Abusers can be neighbors, friends, or, like I said already, family members. About 90% of children who are victims of abuse know their abuser. And we talked about this already. Okay. Here are some of the things, some of the reasons that children do not tell. And again, keep in mind that 30% don't tell at all during childhood, and another 30% don't tell ever. It is important as adults in their lives to clearly get the knowledge, get the kid to understand the following. Every child, each child, always has the right to their own body and who is allowed to see it, who is allowed to touch it, and how. And I know that can be difficult. We do, as parents especially, need to manage and handle our children's bodies, but the key there is, how do we handle their bodies? But they do need to understand and know, I am the boss of my body. I don't want you to touch it. Close the door. I'm going to the bathroom. And you'll begin to see some of those modesty, some of those privacy issues coming up and develop in children, and say, no, I want the bathroom door closed now. And it's important to respect that. It's also important for them to know that if they tell you something happened, that they will be believed and that they won't be blamed or punished if they say something has happened. Keep in mind, again, that most of the time it is someone that the adults and the parents know and trust. So it gets very difficult for this situation to be managed. We also want them to know that their feelings will be understood and not overlooked, and that they will be sheltered from further harm. And a lot of the children that I have interviewed, and again, I'm talking about hundreds, haven't been sexually abused once or twice. A lot of them have been abused for years, 5 years, 7 years. And some of them who have disclosed to a parent or somebody else that it's happening haven't been protected from further harm. Sometimes they're not believed. Sometimes they are called liars and all kinds of other stuff. And so it is important for us to say to them, if something happens, I'm going to try to help you. Some of the feelings that we can see are sadness, shame, anger, and we need to understand that some of that can come from the trauma of this abuse. We also want them to understand that it is never, ever, ever their fault. I have worked on cases where the perpetrators have said, well, this kid was a willing participant, or this kid was 15, or this kid was whatever, making excuses. And the truth of the matter is that we have a minor who doesn't have the legal right to give consent, and the adult should have been the one to know better, and it is our job to protect children. So it is never, ever, ever their fault. Okay, some of the very basics things that we want to do is teach appropriate names for body parts. Vagina, right, is the birth canal. Vulva, if for those of you who don't know, is the outside of a female body, which you can see if like you go to the doctor and your legs are in stirrups, and which you can see just without looking or without touching anything, would be the vulva. We've got penis, we've got testicles, we've got breasts, we've got the anus, and we've got the buttocks. What I have seen with most children, especially the little ones, is that they don't know these names, and they're given other names. I can't even tell you, wee-wee or cookie or all kinds of other stuff. That may be cute, and it may be funny, but it also sends the wrong message that these parts maybe we don't talk about, or we're making light of something versus the nose or the ear. It is important to talk to the children, teach them about these parts. You can begin doing that when you're changing diapers, when you're bathing them, by telling them, make sure that you wash behind your ears, make sure that you wash your vulva, make sure that your testicles are clean. And we can say it in just a normal way, like we would talk about any other parts. When we're changing diapers, even before a child even knows what these words are, as we're talking to them, we can say, oh, I'm just going to clean around your vulva with this wipe. It's a little cold, but I'm going to warm it up. And they get used to the words. They don't feel funny, as long as they don't feel funny to you. And it can just be a conversation that develops. I have a daughter now who's 9. When she goes in the shower, I still wash her hair because she still needs me to do that. But in terms of her body, I still say to her, make sure you wash under your arms, behind your ears, make sure your vulva is clean, make sure this, and it's just another body part. It's important for us to be comfortable using those parts, those names, just like we're talking about anything else. And the other thing that is important to keep in mind when we're talking to our children about their body parts and what they're called is to talk about them only in terms of, yes, what they're called, how they work, how to keep them safe, how to keep them healthy. So cleanliness, what they're used for, what they're not used for, who can touch them, who can't touch them, when to ask for help. If there's any redness, just like if there's any redness on your cheek and there's a rash that won't go away, same thing for your penis or anything else. So one of the biggest things that I've seen children don't know is proper body parts, and that becomes difficult when they need to tell me something happened and then there's an investigation going on, maybe law enforcement, maybe child protective services, and they don't know what parts of their body are called. They call them by a different name, or they don't even want to say the other name. They may point, and it gets a lot more complicated. Not to mention that the child is feeling some kind of shame or guilt around those body parts and or what happened to them. All right. I keep seeing the chat kind of blinking, so I just wanted to make sure that there's nothing we need to answer right now.
Okay. Hey, sorry. We do have a couple questions if you want.
Okay.
If you have time. Yeah, let's see.
Okay.
So we had one question that was, how often is it found that the mother or females in the family are the sexual abusers?
Mothers used to be the sexual abusers, females, not mothers. Females, including grandmothers, around 13% of the time, with 87 being males. And now females have gone up to 17% of the time, and males are down to 83. So there are more females abusing children.
Thank you. And then we just had one more. Is there any data or ideas about children being sexually abused by adults who were also sexually abused as children?
A lot. Yes, there's a lot of data around that. there's so much more that we can cover, and we won't, unfortunately, today. But many adults, not all of them, who have been abused as children will go on to molest when they're adults. That doesn't mean that they all do, though. There's different factors that play a role in that. There's alcohol, there's substance abuse, there's mental illness, there's impulse control issues. What else? Yeah, that there's different factors that play a role. Levels of stress also play a role in that. We do know just right now, for example, during this quarantine, children are at home, and a lot of them are stuck with their abusers. We know for a fact that during Christmas vacation, summer vacation, or sorry, winter break, summer break, the times when children are at home and not at school, they experience more sexual abuse. And so right now, that is one of the concerns of people in the field of child abuse, that we know that children have been stuck at home for 3 months, and we know that this is happening. So we expect reports of that to go up once they get back into school.
Great, thank you. Those were the only two we had so far.
Okay, thanks, Emma. All right, so aside from teaching children body parts, their appropriate body parts, and that there's no shame in talking about them or washing them or asking how this works or how that works, we also want to let them know that what to do if something happens, right? Let's go on to the next slide. Let's start with number one here. We want to model healthy boundaries. A child, like I said earlier, needs to be taught that no one can look at my body, touch my body, or handle me in a way that feels uncomfortable. And that can be tricky when parents can kind of get away with whatever we want, and other people can't. So the message children sometimes get is, so my parent can grab me or pull me or yank me by the arm, but my teacher is not supposed to do it. And so we want to model healthy boundaries in the home, in the classroom, anywhere else where children are. We want them to understand that if somebody wants a hug, they should ask for it, and you want to say yes. And if you say no, you can say no, but in order to hug someone, you should get a yes from that person. We want to help them develop good sensory awareness. This is what I was talking about earlier. So sometimes children will know that it's not okay for somebody to touch me in certain parts of my body. But where it gets a little gray and it gets a little difficult for them to manage is they don't trust their gut feelings. And what I say to people is, at least for me as a woman, and I think most women feel or have had this experience, you walk into an elevator maybe, there's nobody else there except for one person, so there's just the two of you, and that person can say to you, good morning, and you say good morning, and everything feels fine. But that person can also say good morning, and you get this like, this creepy feeling, right? Your gut is going, uh-oh, danger, danger. And that's its job. A lot of us as adults, we don't listen to that, or we feel like we're adults, I'm gonna get off at the next floor, and we try to get ourselves to safety, which is great. But many people who don't develop their sensory awareness will miss those cues. They won't pick up on the danger signs that our gut is sending out, and they will ignore it. And so that can happen. And we can contribute to that by saying to a child who maybe doesn't want to kiss an uncle, don't be rude, kiss him, give him a hug. We want to trust and honor children who say, well, I don't want to kiss that uncle or that grandma or whatever it is. Even if it's just for that day or that moment, something about that person, that interaction, that setting is telling the child that it's not safe, and we want to honor that. So we want to teach them to trust their gut feelings, their instincts, because they will tell them what is wrong, and they will tell them, the children, that they need to leave or get away, go to someone who feels safer. We want to help them identify when touch feels uncomfortable or unsafe or scary. of course, if it's painful, or if it makes them feel dirty or gross or nauseous or secretive. And those are all conversations that we can have with children at different moments. We don't have to sit and have this very serious talk and say, hey, if somebody touches you, it's going to feel like this, or you want to do that. We can use anytime. If we hug them, we can say, how does that feel? Oh, it feels warm and safe, and I love it. Great. That's how a hug should feel. Or we can be at the playground with our 4 or 5-year-old, and they can see something or see someone and come to you. And I think it's fine to comfort them, but you also want to say, what were you feeling when you ran over here, or when you saw that person do that? Because we want them to learn the signs that something's off. I don't know, I just felt kind of gross in my stomach. It just gave me the creeps. Okay, listen to that. So we want to help them develop good sensory awareness so that they're able to pay attention to their bodies. Before we recognize cognitively that something is wrong and we are in danger, our bodies will pick up on those signals and let us know. So we want to teach them to learn to listen to those and develop those. Just want to check if there's any questions on that one, because I know that one can be a little tricky. We're not used to talking to our children about those things.
We did have a couple questions. So we did have someone, and you kind of did elaborate more, asking for you to elaborate on what the good sensory awareness is. So I don't know if you have anything further to add.
I think, yeah, well, I hope what I just said explains it, but even us as adults, right? When we check in and we go inward and we say, how's my body feeling? How's my gut feeling? Are we able to listen to the signs or even hear them? Or are we completely disconnected from our body so that we don't pick up on those signs? We know today that there's things that are going to help children and adults just improve like feelings of sadness or anxiety and things like that. And some of that can be meditation or mindfulness. When we practice those things, it's going to put us more in touch with our inner feelings, right? With our gut sense, with our instincts. And so some of those practices will help, but also when children, when something happens to them, saying, how do you feel? Oh, it hurts right here. Look, okay, how does it feel on the inside? Oh, and they'll say things like, my heart is sad. I've had kids say to me, it feels really heavy in my stomach, or it feels like that. So I think giving a little attention, asking about how does it feel inside your body will help develop that sense. And if we start that with children early on, it doesn't feel strange to them, right? There's our 5 senses, and then there's also internal senses, where there's another 2 that we can teach them to tap into. If I start with a 50-year-old man and say, hey, how does that feel inside your body? And he's not used to it, he's going to go, what are you talking about? That's weird. But we all are born with that sense. And if we teach them to develop it early on, they'll get pretty good at picking up on the danger signals before something happens. And really that's what we want these children to be able to do, and adults. Was there a second one, Emma, or was that?
Great, thank you. Yeah, there were actually a couple more.
Okay.
So we had someone ask, how do you go about the sensory awareness in teaching with a child who's only 18 months old? So, or what age do you suggest would be a good age to start talking to them about this?
Yeah. So that's such a great question. So children about 18 months old, this is the thing, we are all born with this sensory awareness. And it's what's interesting is when we're born, the day we're born, even before that, that part of our body, that part of our brain, the behind brain, the reptilian brain down here, is already fully developed and online when it comes to that sensory piece. And so understanding that, I think, is important. It isn't something that we need to teach them and have them learn from somewhere. They come like that. They don't have the thinking yet. They don't have the ability to name emotions or things like that, but they absolutely have the ability to sense and feel, right? And they tell us by crying, by looking at us when they want stimulation, or maybe breaking eye contact when they're tired and need a little break. So they already are born with pretty good sensory awareness, unless they have some kind of sensory processing issues, but that's a different thing. So with those infants or really little kids, it's going to be really important the how. Again, how do we handle their bodies? How do we hold them? How do we feed them? How do we change their diapers? And by that, I mean, what does our voice sound like? What does our face look like when we're doing all these things? We want to help them stay safe, feeling safe. And a lot of that is connected. They're very finely attuned to the caregiver's face and tone of voice. You probably remember, again, back to when you were a child, when you were 10, if you saw your mom or somebody walk in the door from work, you looked at their face and you said, uh-oh, they're in a bad mood. I better, be mindful and behave myself. Or they're in a really great mood. I know I can play around more with them. So children are very finely attuned to the adults, the caregivers in their world, and infants especially so. And so we want to keep them feeling safe so that they can develop some of that. There's a lot we can go into, but we want. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Emma? Okay.
Yes, and then we just had one more, and then we'll save the rest for the end.
Okay.
Can you add a little more about how to explain it to your family about why you're giving the child permission to choose to greet them with a hug or a kiss or not?
To a family like grandparents and things like that, I'm assuming.
Yeah, because they said, just because it can be kind of rude or hard to talk to family members, who are already uncomfortable with the topic.
Yes, absolutely. And so, that's probably one of the toughest things, right? When we go to a family gathering and there are family members and everybody wants to grab your little one or 5-year-old or 10-year-old and wants or expects a hug and a kiss. One of the things, and I think number 4 here says, offer children the opportunity to practice saying no. And again, going back to honoring their instinctive self of who is safe and who isn't. If we have a baby, we're holding them and people go like this and they go, oh, come here. And the child turns and holds on to you, then we can say something like, oh, they're not ready yet, or they're not in the mood right now. If somebody says something like, oh, you don't want your kids to be like that, or we don't want them to be rude, or what's wrong with him? What's wrong with her? Why is she doing that? We can say, and I've said this with my daughter, she's 9 now, but I remember when she was younger, I would say, I'm trying to teach her that she's in charge of her body, because I don't want something to happen one day. And I kind of, explain, this is what I'm teaching her right now. And when you explain it to people, they, some of them are curious and they say, well, what do you mean? What do you do for work again? And I explain some of the things that I've seen. My concern would be if someone responds negatively and says, that's ridiculous. They need to do this and they need to do that. And I would be concerned. And I would say, well, that person doesn't understand. I'm trying to teach my children. They're not supporting me in that. And I might be concerned that this is, maybe there's a reason why my child doesn't want to go hug them. So it can be really tricky. I think when you're able to explain to other adults who genuinely care for your children what you're trying to do and what you're trying to teach them, they can begin to be open to the conversation, learn about it themselves, maybe teach their own children. It can be very tricky, but I don't know. I think as a mom of a daughter, I had at one point to say, you know what, this is my kid, this is what I want to teach them. And that's all there is to it. I'm the boss here. So I know that can be really difficult, especially with grandparents and things like that. Anything else, Emma? Are we moving on?
Yeah, we can move on. Thank you for answering this.
Okay. So number 3 says, teach them how to avoid being lured and what traps to avoid. And so this is, this is also going to be age appropriate. By now, my daughter at age 9 knows that if somebody asks her to do something, let's say at school, that feels weird, right? I've given her permission to listen to her gut, and if anything feels weird or uncomfortable, she doesn't have to do it, even if it's at the request of a teacher. So if anything feels weird or feels funny, if anything goes against family rules, right? And one of the rules that we know for sure at our house is nobody should touch you if you don't want to be touched. I don't care who, I don't care if it's on the shoulder, they shouldn't do it. So if anything goes against that rule that our family has established, don't listen to it. If anything involves a secret that doesn't make you feel good, that's a potential issue. There are secrets that make you feel good, like, oh, we're having a surprise birthday party for my mom. I'm excited. But if there's a secret that makes you feel kind of creepy or gross or nasty, then we want to be careful. We also want to let them know that if they earned a special favor that no one else had the opportunity to earn, it's probably not right. If any request seems like it would separate the child from other children, for example, in the classroom, everyone's going to go to recess, but you're going to help me because you earned the special treat, and we're going to whatever, then not okay. We want children to understand at the appropriate age that someone who's going to do something is more likely going to use some kind of trick and not force. Some people, not most of them, will trick a child into being victimized. They won't usually grab a kid and throw them into their car like we hear in the movies. It does happen, but not when it comes to this. Number 4 says offer children opportunities to practice saying no to grandmas, to parents, to authority figures. And again, you can say, hey, maybe she's not ready to hug you. As my daughter was growing up and we were talking about this, she'd be sitting at the table or doing homework, and my husband came home, I remember one day, and just kind of gave her a kiss on the cheek, and she was like, you didn't ask for permission. You can't kiss me if I don't want you to. And he looked at me, and I was like, she's practicing, right? She's the boss of her body, and if you want to give her a kiss, you should ask her. And he's like, okay. So it feels kind of weird at home, and maybe people are going to be like, that's weird, she's my kid, but what if I say to him sometimes, let's forward 10 years or 20 years, right? Do we want her to feel forced to take kisses or take anything else from anyone? And the answer is no. I think the answer is no for most people. Lastly, you want to teach them what to say and what to do. And we want to be careful with these generalized rules that we give children. For example, you should never hit, you should never bite, you should never be rude. And that's true most of the time with other children or at schools or with family members. But also, if someone isn't respecting you, if someone is trying to do something to you that is not okay, and again, clearly a violation of family rules like being touched in certain places, then you have permission to yell and to hit and to do whatever you need to do to get yourself to safety. And the example that I have here is, this is a mom that I know personally who said that she always told her daughter she shouldn't bite. Biting was bad, and she should never do it. And I think in her early teens, someone tried to rape her. She was on her bike, and someone grabbed her and tried to rape her. And the way that she got away from this guy was she bit him on the cheek, and she bit a part of his cheek off, which is horrible to do, but it got her to safety. So I think we need to be careful with saying you should never do this or never do that. Hitting, kicking, biting, yelling, any of those things, we don't want them to do on a regular basis at home with their siblings or with their friends, but we want to let them know that those are defense skills, right? That's our fight or flight. And we need them to know that that is accessible to them and that they can use it when they need it. I hope that makes sense. Okay, the last thing that I want to say with this slide is that teaching children good touch, bad touch, which is something that we did 20, 30 years ago, is not, it's not enough, and it's not really, let me give you an example. I've had several boys and some girls say to me, this is what happened, it was gross, I didn't like it, but it did feel good. Right? And we know that sexual touch can be pleasurable and can feel good. And so to try to distinguish between good touch, this feels good, like a hug from mommy and a warm towel after your bath, versus bad touch from the bad guy who touches you down there, isn't really clear. We want them to know any touch that makes you feel uncomfortable is not okay. Because again, with perpetrators, what we know is that before they actually do something sexual to a child, there's a grooming process. They desensitize them to maybe being touched on the shoulder and feeling creepy. And they're like, okay, well, it's just the shoulder. It's not my private part. Mommy said only private parts. And they keep moving along that continuum until it's too late. And by then, a lot of the time, children feel, they feel guilty. They feel like they participated. They feel like they didn't say something early enough, and then it becomes too late. Okay, so when we talk about consent, and this is something I mentioned earlier, we want to honor, again, our child's right to say who, how, and when they are touched. And with that, we want to teach them to ask if they want to hug a little friend. Ask, can I give you a hug? I'm so excited to see you. We want to listen for an answer, yes or no. And then we want to respect whatever the answer is. If the kid says, no, I don't want you, then you go, okay, no hugs. But we want to listen, and ideally we want affirmative consent. And what that means is, if somebody asks me, do you want to do this? I need to say, yes, I really want to do that. Let's do it. Versus, I guess, right? You want to go hug grandpa? I guess. That is not affirmative consent. And that tells you, I really don't want to, but I feel like I have to, so I guess I should. And I think it's very risky to teach our children to kind of go against their gut and against what they feel or don't feel like doing. That's all I'm going to say about affirmative consent, and I hope that it makes sense. All right. Another thing that is important to understand about child sexual abuse, there was this paper written by Roland Summit. It's called the Child Sexual Abuse Accommodation Syndrome. And basically it helps us understand some of that dynamics around childhood sexual abuse. Like I said earlier, most people, especially parents, expect that if something happens to our child, they're going to tell us, and they're going to tell us right away. And that is simply not the case. So he basically said when there is sexual abuse, there's usually a secret. They're either told that it's a secret or it is implied. A lot of the time there is a threat of what's going to happen if they tell someone. And I've heard threats like, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kill your mom, or I'm going to jail, and who's going to pay for our rent, or no one's going to believe you, you're just a kid, I'm a teacher, or I'm this, or I'm that. So there always is this secrecy around it. And it's very difficult for children to navigate that secrecy if they haven't been told, these kinds of secrets are not okay, and your body belongs to you, and nobody should do this and nobody should do that. So we are trying to give them the knowledge and help them develop that sensory awareness so that they can't be tricked into living with a secret like this. The other thing that we know is that children who have been abused in this way feel powerless, emotionally powerless to resist or to complain. And again, as parents, we don't understand that. We feel that they should tell us. But the example I like to give here is we probably, as adults, the adults here, probably all know someone who has been or is in a relationship that isn't healthy. Maybe they're mistreated. And we might feel that this adult should leave the relationship and get out or do something or ask for help. And they simply are not able to do so yet. They're not ready. They feel emotionally powerless. And if adults can feel that way and be trapped in a situation or have this secrecy around this relationship, can you imagine a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 2 or 3-year-old? It gets very tricky, and it's not that easy for them to manage. Again, the accommodation is about adapting to what is happening. when, again, a child sexual abuse, it's usually not something that happens one time and then it's over, especially if it's someone that the child knows. When this happens, it happens over and over again, and the child begins to feel trapped. They don't know how to get out of it, and they learn to adapt to it. Many children have said to me, oh, I just understood that it was something that it was going to happen when I went to, this person's home, or when I went to that classroom, or when we went camping with that family. I just knew that that's just the way it was. And I learned to deal with it, and I learned to kind of compartmentalize it and just kind of not think about it, which is not the best thing to do. So by the time children disclosed, and I've seen them disclose 5 years later, 10 years later, and I teach at Cal State LA, I've had adult students sometimes disclose to me that something happened when they were a child and they never told anybody. So a lot of the time, by the time a child discloses that they have been abused, it is not too late to do something about it. It is really late. That's probably the word I should have put on there. What we know about memory, encoding, storage, and retrieval is that if someone discloses something 5 or 10 years later, the story may sound inconsistent, right? And the child may be conflicted. We don't know the reason. Why did they choose to disclose now versus then? What happened? And there usually is a reason. And not that other people should ask, but in a forensic interview, I will ask at the end, what made you not tell when you were 7? And they'll tell me, I was scared. I thought this was going to happen. They've said, a lot of children have said to me, I didn't know it was wrong. I knew it felt wrong, but I didn't know what it was until my teacher talked about it in class. And then I knew, oh my goodness, someone sexually abused me. I do try to find out, what made you tell now? Oh, you went to that class. Okay, I got it. Oh, somebody moved out, somebody broke up, and now you feel safer, or you know more. So because it's late, because it's consistent, because sometimes they say, well, that happened when it was 7. No, wait, hold on, it happened when I was 8. People don't want to believe them, and they think, well, how could you not remember that? How could you not know if it was at this house or that house or that teacher, whatever. So memory can get really tricky, especially as time goes on, and it's going to be difficult for children to give us an accurate description of something. And especially if they have to tell the story to different people, it may have a piece here that they didn't tell the other person. When we watch a movie, or when we go to a wedding, or just something on the weekend, and someone says, hey, how was your weekend? You say, oh, I did this, I did X, Y, and Z. You know that sometimes, an hour later or a day later, you go, oh, I forgot to tell them that one thing. That was so funny. Childhood memory, especially around child abuse, can have some of those similar dynamics. So if we have a child who has finally told, things may start to move, things may start to happen, someone may get in trouble, the child is being questioned over and over again. Maybe they need to speak to a police officer, maybe they need to come and talk to me, a forensic interviewer, tell their story again, right? Maybe a lot of the time, I hate to say this, but it's absolutely true, moms are upset, especially if it is someone that an adult in the mom's life that they love. So what happens is the child may retract their allegations, right? They recant, we call that a recantation. And they're trying to get back the order in the family. Well, at least when it was like that, I knew what to expect, but I knew, how to handle it, and I knew what to do. Now I don't, and it feels like my family's being destroyed. Mom won't talk to me about it. I feel alone. Somebody's upset. I have to talk to all these different people. Oh my goodness, I need to go have a medical exam, and they need to look down there. So there's a lot of things that happen. And these are all some of the things that are important for adults to know, so that we don't invalidate a child's disclosure because they told me this and they told the social worker something a little bit different. I saw some popping up on the chat. Emma, anything that we should talk about here?
Yeah, let me see. We did have a question. Let me go through them. And some of them I'm saving for the end. So if you've put questions and I haven't gotten to them, I have them and I will get to them. But I'll do a couple here. So how would you differentiate teaching the child they're in charge and working through separation anxiety? So she put, her son doesn't like going to the sitter when she leaves. So how would she teach him that the sitter is safe, and he's 14 months old?
Oh, I don't want to scare any parents. I think to me, and again, I've interviewed over 1,000 children. I've been working with childhood sexual abuse for 15 years. How do I know that someone is absolutely safe, right? It's really tough. It, it's hard. Someone who's 14 months old, and whoever this mom is, I'm going to say this just so that you know, a lot of the cases that I've seen have happened at daycare. Some daycares are great, some of them are not. So you want to also listen to your gut about, you know, these people taking care of your baby. But that's really tough, and talking to him or her is important, but also it's important to know that some of your words and some of the concepts that you're trying to help your baby understand are cognitive, and his brain development, some of the structures in the brain that he needs to understand what you want to tell him are not there yet. So it's hard to expect him to understand something if he's not able to. What that is telling us is he doesn't feel safe. If he's crying and he clings to you and doesn't want to be dropped off, there's something about it. I don't know, I'm not saying he's being sexually abused, but there's something about it that doesn't feel safe. And it may not be the person, it may be another kid, it may be, who knows? It can be a number of things. I'm happy to speak to this person outside on their own if they would like. But that's all that I can say about that right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, so
Okay.
we'll just stick with that one, and then we'll do the rest at the end. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right. So the other thing that is really important for people to understand, not just parents, but I testify on cases, and juries also, they expect that if a child has been sexually abused, they're going to look this way, they're going to sound this way, and they're going to respond this way. But we know that there is no right way to respond emotionally or behaviorally to childhood sexual abuse. It is very difficult, and depending on several factors, you're going to have a child just respond differently. If a child has a parent who is responsive, who is safe, who's protective, and steps in and does what they need to do without overreacting and saying, well, I'm going to go kill somebody if they ever touch you. That's also not a good thing for children to be told, because then they're worried about you killing someone and going to jail. So if a child has a protective, nurturing parent who responds appropriately, they're more likely to move their trauma a little quicker and have better outcomes. If a child discloses and somebody doesn't believe, and like, for example, I have a lot of moms who don't believe it, and the child is obviously living with mom and she's upset, the child doesn't have anyone to talk to, they're going to respond a different way. Some children may become aggressive. Some children may act out sexually. Some children may become withdrawn and quiet and then lock themselves up in their room, or just it's almost like they want to disappear. So there is no right way to respond. I'm going to show you some symptoms or signs of sexual trauma that you may see. If you see any sexualized behaviors that are not age appropriate, like masturbating in public, or simulating intercourse or other sexual behaviors, any seductive gestures, touching someone else's genitals, so something that isn't age appropriate. There are some behaviors that are considered sexual play and developmentally typical. Those are okay, but these are not. If a child, I think this kind of speaks to the person who just asked, has a sudden refusal, reluctance, or fear at being left alone with a certain person or in a particular place that the child once enjoyed. That's the other thing for this person. Did the child at one point like going to daycare and enjoy it and look forward to it and the toys and the friends, and now they don't? Or is this just the initial transition between they've been home with me the whole time and now this is a transition to something different? So something to think about there. if they're withdrawn from adults, from children, or have a hard time making friends. Clearly, I think number 4, any pain, burning, itching, or bruising around the genital area, the anal area, even around the mouth. Sometimes, especially with little kids, I have seen kids come in for a forensic interview who never disclosed or told anybody that they have been sexually abused, but they were found to have a sexually transmitted infection. So, right, how did they get that? So anything around that is important to look at. Indirect disclosures, I think adults sometimes miss, right? I don't want to be an altar boy anymore. We may go into, well, God and this, and it's so great, and you're whatever. We want to instead say, tell me about that. How come? What, you used to love it. Why don't you want to do it anymore? Or somebody says, my friend Anna's dad wears underwears and underwear that has have tigers on them. Okay, how do you know that? And get a little more. What I know from children that I have spoken to personally during forensic interviews is that they have said, I tried to tell. I have a little boy, I remember a little boy who said, I grabbed my mom's hand and I was pulling her because I was going to tell her, but she said she needed to clean the kitchen. And that was his attempt at trying to tell somebody. So we want to be mindful of indirect disclosures like this, or children attempting to tell us something and just not knowing what words to use, especially if we haven't taught them certain words or said, hey, I don't care if I'm sleeping or if this or if where I'm at work, you call me if anything happens, if this is an emergency. Giving them permission to do that. And again, listen to their gut. There are other symptoms like bedwetting once the child is potty trained, not at age 3 or 4 or anything like that. But once the child is a little older, has been potty trained and has been doing that for an amount of time, and then they begin bedwetting. Any regressive behaviors like clinginess or wanting to just sleep with you again, any changes around eating or sleeping habits, inability to focus, which can be age appropriate, but if this is something new, if they're always irritable, if they have sudden mood changes, if they're excessively shy, again, this speaks to being withdrawn and not feeling comfortable talking to people and speaking out. Or any postures that reveal a sense of shame or guilt, right? Like the shoulders curved in, or maybe their legs are always crossed, or they're kind of have their hands, protecting that area. Anything like that, you just want to be mindful of. Any of these symptoms don't mean for sure your child or this child has been sexually abused, but it's something to be aware of and ask questions about it. Okay. Let's see. If you know or if you suspect child sexual abuse, please report it to your local law enforcement agency or child protection hotline. Remember that a child may only try to reach out or tell one time, and believe them. All right. Okay, Emma, that is all I have in my PowerPoint, but I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you have.
Thank you so much. Yes, that was great. And we definitely have a few more questions. So let me pull them up here. And I just wanted to say, because I got a question about it, Monica will be doing this same exact presentation this Thursday in Spanish. If people are interested in that, I can send the link to register for that. Or if you go on our website, cirinc.org, you can register for the Spanish session there. And that will also be recorded if you can't make it on Thursday. You can check our website. So let's see. We had a few stats questions from earlier. So someone asked, is there any data on ages of children that have been abused that it will increase the likelihood of them becoming adult sexual abusers?
What we know about children who have been abused is if they don't receive the proper treatment, they may, right? I don't want people to think that if you were sexually abused as a child, you're automatically going to become this, but there's different factors, right? But the appropriate treatment is critical. when I have children who have been molested, for different reasons, boys and girls, I try to get the parents or the caregivers to understand that even though they think, I've got this, no, they don't need help, I'm there, I can handle it. I don't know what parent is prepared and knows how to manage this type of situation with their children. Parenting on its own is hard enough, challenging enough, and to throw in, now I need to help my child through this trauma and teach them all these things. And it's just it's a big ask of parents. So I think appropriate treatment is critical. We do have, I've seen too many adult males who have been prosecuted, arrested for abusing children say at some point, not all of them, I was abused as a child, and we're seeing also teenage, young adult perpetrators. So like older teen on younger child type of abuse. And again, I just wonder who is treating this child, this minor, who's giving them the time and energy and knowledge that they should have, ideally been given when they were little, but weren't. Can we repair now? That's going to be really important. The thing that I see more often with girls and with women is I have talked to a lot of moms whose children have been abused by, a lot of the time, the mom's significant other, and mom is in disbelief. She comes in, I interview the daughter, I speak to the mom, and at some point, a lot of these moms will say, I was abused too. And when I say, well, what happened? Did somebody help you? Did you tell? Did somebody believe you? They say, no, nothing happened. I didn't know. And so what happens again is if we have a young girl who doesn't get the appropriate treatment, she's very likely to choose a partner who may be doing the same thing to her children. Again, not always, I don't want to scare people, but if we talk about that sensory awareness, right, and not developing that, I may choose a partner and I'm not picking up on the signs of like creepiness or whatever you want to call it, and bring him into my home with my children or have children with him. And that's something that I have personally seen in hundreds of cases.
Thank you. Let's see, our next one was, what is the appropriate thing to say when a close family member discloses their trauma?
Is it an adult? Is it a child? Yeah, I think it depends on that. I think if it's a child, we need to probably act more swiftly and get them out of the dangerous situation. Let them know that this isn't okay and that you're glad they told and that you're going to do, whatever it takes to keep them safe. Get them treatment, right? By ideally someone who specializes in not just trauma, but childhood sexual abuse. The other thing that I would be concerned about, whether this is a child or an adult and they disclose their trauma, I want to know who the suspect was, who the perpetrator was or is, because I want to know if that perpetrator still has access to other children, right? Do they have access to other children? Do they have their own children? Are they still out there? Whatever, teaching or coaching or doing whatever. So I think responding, the first thing, I'm so glad you told me, right? If it's a child we need to protect, especially if we're mandated reporters. But if it's a child that we know, how, can we be that person? Maybe that helps them through it. Refer to the appropriate agencies, maybe CPS, maybe law enforcement. Definitely counseling, victim advocacy, things like that.
Great, thank you. And then we had a question about resources or books. So if you have any recommendations for books or other resources you'd recommend for parents to educate themselves to make it comfortable to talk to their kids.
This is one of my favorite books. I don't know if you can see it, Emma. Can you?
Trauma-Proofing Your Kids. Perfect.
Yeah. Trauma-Proofing Your Kids by Peter Levine and Maggie Klein. Some of the stuff we talked about today, especially the sensory awareness stuff, comes from Peter Levine. He's one of the leading experts on trauma and has worked with a lot of childhood sexual abuse. So that's one of them. There's just so many good stuff out there. Here's this one. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see that one, Emma?
The Whole Brain Child. Oh yes, that's
the
a good
whole.
one.
Yeah, the Whole Brain Child is good. There's a lot of really good books. To prevent trauma, and was that the question, Emma? Or was
it was to get people more comfortable with talking to their kids about this subject. And I know you're developing a resource for us that will that will help. That will send to everyone. So.
I think that one of the most important things for adults to be able to do before they do talk to their children is probably talk to other adults, right? So maybe like your friends or your siblings or coworkers, like you can say, hey, I went to this thing, or I know I need to talk to my kids about this, but it just feels so weird. And just begin to have that conversation among adults to see how it feels, see how it feels to talk about vaginas and penises and touching and what to do if, and listening to your gut. Once you are feeling a little better about it and have the knowledge, right? Have what you need to know and what you want to teach them, then you can move into it with children. The other thing with kids is they're pretty forgiving. I mean, you can say something like, hey, we need to talk about this thing. I don't know everything. I know some stuff, but I want to make sure that you're safe. That's what I worry about. That's what I care about. And, sometimes I'm a little uncomfortable, but I think it's important to talk about it and see what they say, and maybe they look at you and they say, well, why are you wanting to talk about this now? Like, I'm 10 now. Why now? But it's being, I think, sitting with your own discomfort, moving through that, and then approaching the kid. It's really tricky. I think about my mom and my sister, right? I can talk to my sister about it, and I'm like, you need to talk to she has my niece. You need to talk to her about this, and she's like, I know, it's just weird. But with my mom, she's like, no, we don't talk about that. We don't talk. So my mom just kind of walks away, and that can be really difficult. And it really puts children at risk when adults are so uncomfortable that they don't address the issue at all. So I think that probably speaks to some of the work that the adult needs to do to get more comfortable with the content. If there's anything in their past that contributes to their discomfort, they might need to work through that.
Great, thank you. Those are great recommendations, and I put them in the chat, the title and the authors, and then I can include them in our follow-up email as well. So let's see, our next question, just go through them. We had someone ask, how do you get your child to say more without bombarding them with questions?
To say more about, just about their bodies, about what's going on, or about if something happened?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that person could specify, if it's about just general questions to see if something's going on, or if they truly suspect something.
Right. Okay, so I'll start with general. Again, the comfort piece for the adult is going to be key, right? And so when they're bathing, when they're when they wipe themselves or whatever, and sometimes not as much now, but when my daughter was younger, I would want to just look to make sure that she was cleaning herself well, right? So I would say, I'm going to look, let me just, I'm not going to touch you or whatever, but I need to make sure you're okay. Now it's more, hey, or if I see her like maybe, scratching or something, I'll say, hey, is your vulva itchy? Make sure it's clean. Why don't you go look? Why don't you wipe? Or why don't you, whatever, let me know if you need any help. I talk about it like it could be anything else when it comes to those parts. I want her to know if there's anything different down there, if it looks different, if there's if it, whatever, let me know. We'll take care of it. We want to make sure that it's healthy and it's safe and no one's doing anything to it. That's one. if we suspect, I think this also, this, everything we've talked about today is not a conversation to be had. It is a conversation that continues and develops as children develop and learn different things, right? So I'm not going to tell a 2-year-old something that I might tell a 10-year-old, or something that I might tell a 15-year-old. But this is opening the lines of communication, giving them information as they develop that is maybe a little more different, a little more sophisticated, a little more obviously age appropriate, and letting them know if there's anything that happens, you can come to me. I will, like I said earlier, I will take, where's it? I'm gonna go back to that slide. Right, you are the boss of your own body, no matter what. I'm going to believe you if you ever say anything to me that something's happening. I'm going to protect you and do whatever I need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And it is never your fault. And this may be a conversation that's uncomfortable, but I want you to be able to tell me. If we're able to have these other conversations about body parts and bathing and make sure that that's clean and make sure you dry it when you get out of the bath, it's not a far way to go to say, hey, something happened. And you can take it from there. If they do disclose that something has happened, you want to be careful and not ask too many questions, because you don't want to, what law enforcement says, you don't want to contaminate the case. So you don't want to begin to ask questions like, did he put this in there? And did he do that? And did he, how many, you want to just find out who did it, when they did it. And if at any point you know, oh my goodness, this was not okay, you want to shut it down, let the child know that you're there to talk about whatever they're feeling and comfort them and hold them and all of that stuff and protect them. But we need to let other people know so that they can take care of what they need to take care of. We know that a lot of people who molest children don't molest one child. We usually have other victims. Some people have way too many victims, and you know, we want to talk about those things. It's tricky. Every case is individual, so I don't want you to think, I don't know. Every case is individual, and every child's age and development and understanding of what happens and feelings around it and relationship with the perpetrator and relationship with let's say the mom, if that's who they're telling, every kid is going to be different. So we want to be mindful of all of those things.
Great, thank you. And then our next question was, what sexual behaviors are normal for children?
Okay. Yeah. You know what? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because I want to try to pull up my list. Some of the typical, I guess, behaviors, normal behaviors, are 2 6-year-olds or 6 and a 7-year-old saying, show me yours and I'll show you mine, right? I'm really curious. You have that part, you have a penis and I don't have a penis and I want to know what it looks like. And if you show me that, I'll show you this. So some of that is normal. We want to be mindful of the age difference. So if they're both around the same age, developmental, cognitively also, right? It might be okay. You want to speak to the children and let them know that that's not, it's not appropriate, right? Do you have any questions? Let's talk about it. You know, whatever. They're going to be curious and you want them to come to you with their curiosity. But once you say to them, this isn't okay, you shouldn't be showing your parts to someone else and they shouldn't be showing you yours and you shouldn't be touching them and they shouldn't be touching yours, then the behavior should kind of diminish, right? If you have a child who's significantly older than the other child and has more power, or there's any type of fear involved, right? Or coercion. This kid didn't want to, but he was forced to because this kid said they were going to do this. That's not appropriate. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other things around that, but I can't find my other PowerPoint. But yeah, kind of show me yours, and I'll show you mine. Touching themselves, both boys and girls, is pretty normal. They probably find that it's pleasurable to touch themselves in that area around 2 or 3 or 4, maybe earlier. We want to be careful with how we manage touching themselves, right? We want to say, yep, you found it. It does feel good to touch there. You don't want to do it in the living room when grandma's visiting, right? If you're going to do that, you want to go in your room, make sure the door is closed, and that's something private. That is your body again.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a question, if when you find that list, if that could be emailed to everyone.
It's not a list, it's a little chart.
Okay.
I'm going to try to find it, and I will send it to you, Emma. Is that okay? And
Perfect.
then you can go from there.
Yes.
Okay. It's a little chart that kind of says the age difference, are we able to curb the behaviors by talking to the child? There's a few other things, but I'll try to find it and I'll send it to you.
Great, thank you. Let's see what else we have here. We had one that said, how do you work with parents who do not believe or support their children?
Oh, that's difficult. Well, I think the first thing is CPS involved, right? Because we want the child to be protected and to live in a home where they're going to be sheltered from any type of abuse, really. So I think maybe that's one thing to look at, but clinically, is that what the question is? Is that what the question is?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Yes, she said yes.
Okay, yes, I saw that. Rosa Zavala popped up with a yes. It's likely to take longer, right? Because what we want to consider is that if they're not believing the child, what is the reason why? What's blocking that? And again, based on my experience, they may have had something that happened to them, and they kind of need to work through the trauma and process it. I was working on a case once where we had 2 girls. They were 6 and 8, and the 6-year-old's bio dad was the stepfather to the 8-year-old, and he had violently raped both of them, and they told mom, and mom didn't believe it. And they were brought in. They told a teacher afterwards, and they were brought in and had a medical exam. And the forensic exam revealed internal injury. It was horrible. They found DNA. They found his DNA. They put him away. He ended up getting over 450 years in prison. And the mom didn't believe still. And even when she was presented with the medical evidence and the science around, we know your husband did this, her response was, I remember I was there, I was expecting her to just rage, right? Her response was, oh, okay, it did happen, okay. And there wasn't what you expected. And the guy went to jail, went to prison, and DCFS put safety plan in place and got them to counseling and all that stuff. But I found out later that from the detective whom I ran into, that she had met a new man, and a week after she met him, she went on vacation and left the girls with this new boyfriend of 1 week. And so sometimes I think there's such deep trauma and so much work that needs to be done. It's kind of tough, and I don't know how to make the world safer for these children that are stuck in those situations where a parent doesn't believe, and even when they're presented with evidence and they know, they continue to make decisions that are going to negatively impact the kid. That's a tough question. Sorry, Rosa. There's a lot of work to be done there.
Well, thank you. That was a great answer. And then we had a great question. If children are in placement, do you suggest foster parents have these conversations or someone else?
I think if they've developed a trusting as much as you can in the time that you're in foster care with the parent, yeah, why not? I mean, ideally, I'd love for parents, foster parents, teachers, counselors, coaches, when the opportunity arises to say, yeah, nobody should touch your body. If something makes you uncomfortable, let me know. Tell the teacher, tell an adult. And if you tell an adult, that's the other thing. That I always tell my daughter, something happens and you tell me and I don't believe you, go tell another adult and go tell another adult and keep telling until somebody does something about it. So yeah, I think as adults, everyone, we should be giving children the same exact message. You are the boss of your body. Nobody should do anything to you that makes you feel uncomfortable. And if they do, there are a lot of us around who will, step up and do what we need to do to protect you. Yeah, foster parents, go for it. Social workers, counselors.
Thank you. Let's see. And I just want to say, because I've had a couple questions, so this webinar is being recorded, and we will have it up on our website at cirinc.org. It usually in about a week, we get it up on the website, so you'll be able to watch it whenever you want on there. And we just put the link in the chat. So, and then let's see, we had a question. Someone has children that are 13, 11, and 8. How do I discuss exposure to pornography with them? Like if they happen to be exposed to it on the internet or through friends or?
Yeah. My sister has a 15-year-old, right? My daughter's 9. She doesn't have any access to internet. We just don't allow it unless she's doing homework right now for the quarantine thing. But for those who have an iPad, a phone, things like that, the first thing I want to say is there should be controls set up by the parents, right? Where certain content is not going to be able to come through. The other thing is we do want to talk about pornography. There's I'm trying to think of the person's name who does a really good talk for parents on talking to your children, especially your boys, about porn, right? Because of what that sets up. But I think talking to them, we know that children who are online with no I forget what it's called, it restricts certain content from coming in. 1 out of 5 children are contacted by someone who's pretending to play the game Fortnite or Roblox or whatever, and saying that they're 14 or 16 and they're not. The average age of people playing games online is 36. That's the average, right? Which means you've got people down here, including 14, 15-year-olds, and you're going to have people up into their 50s and 60s playing those games that are designed for children. So I think letting them know that there are dangers. I think some of the basic stuff that we've been saying for 20 years, they shouldn't be in their rooms with their computers. If they're going to be playing anything, it should be in the living room where you can walk by and hear and see their screen. But also having honest conversations about there are people who will say, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm 16, here's my picture. And that's probably not true, right? And if you don't know the person, you shouldn't be playing with them, or you shouldn't be answering their questions about where you go to school, what sport do you play, what numbers on your jersey, and you're going to be playing Friday night and your parents can't be there. So, they shouldn't be giving any of that personal information that doesn't feel personal, right? They have this false sense of security because I'm sitting at home having this conversation, but this person may now know that we have a game Friday night and I'm number 15 and my dad's going to be late to pick me up. And so they're setting that up. And I've seen children share this information and then they're abducted or they're raped or they're approached by someone there and horrible things happen. So I think talking to them, you're obviously talking to a 13-year-old is going to be different than talking to an 8 or 9-year-old. But we absolutely need to have these conversations. There's just too many bad things happening out there with kids, and they're sophisticated enough to know certain things.
Thank you. And then we have a question, let's see. So I guess you would say in your professional experience, do you see a lot of minors perpetrating on other minors, and kind of how do you navigate that?
It's, yeah, that's tough. We do see, to me, I think I'm used to it. I don't want to say that, but I'm not surprised by it. I guess I can say that. We do have that. It's obviously easier to navigate when they're not siblings and they're not living in the same home, right? Because then you have the issue of who's going to go where, who's going to live where. These are both my children. So thinking about keeping them both safe. And I think also having, one of the most important things I'm going to keep saying for everything is communication. What we've seen with the older kids that are perpetrating on younger kids is they probably were victims themselves, and they need help as much as the little one does. It gets really tricky. It gets hard when things continue to develop and it's been years, and you know, their brains are growing in a certain way that it's impacting that, and it may be harder once they're older. But I truly believe that if we get these older children that are perpetrating the appropriate help that they need, we can prevent this. We can prevent them from continuing to do it. I do feel that it's not taken seriously enough when you have a 16-year-old doing something to a younger kid and they say, oh, there are kids that'll grow out of it, but maybe they won't, right? And then what I've said to some parents is, they're 16 right now, or they're 13 right now. The DA decided not to press charges because they're still a minor, but what if this happens again in 5 years or in 10 years, and now they're an adult and they're tried as an adult? And, you know, there are these negative consequences to them. So I tried to, if they don't understand why they need treatment, I try to, I don't know, maybe raise their anxiety a little bit about what may happen if they don't have appropriate treatment. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that was a good answer. Thank you. Let's see, and then we had, I'm not quite sure if you talked about children's books earlier. Do you know of any like children's books that are like for children that talk about their bodies?
There's one about their bodies, the way they function in body parts.
Yeah, I think
there's a book called, I think it's called That's Normal, or it's Totally Normal, something like that. I think it's an American Girl book, but it's pretty decent. I have it, my daughter has it around here somewhere. And it talks about different body parts and how they work and how to keep them clean and healthy. Your ears, your nose, and your teeth, and your hair, and lice, and all of that stuff. And then it goes into periods and things like that. So there are books like that. There's also a really short story for children. It's called The Kid Trapper by Julia Cook with no E. And this is a story that is for younger kids, like 6, 7, 8-year-olds maybe, and older. And it's a story about a kid who felt trapped in the abuse he was experiencing and how he got out. So there's different books and ways to help children know the tricks, know some of the things that happen and how uncomfortable it can be to talk to someone. But someone needs to write another book, so.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I found a book, it's Perfectly Normal by Robbie Harris. That might be the one you were talking about. Let's see, let me just double check. And again,
there's also different organizations who have a lot of really good content on their website. There's one called Darkness to Light, I think it's D2L, and then there's also Partners in Prevention. You can go on both their sites. I'm sure there's more, and they're out there to help try to prevent this type of abuse.
Great. All right, and I'll grab that link and put it in the chat here. Okay, let me double check our questions. And again, if you've asked a question and I haven't gotten to it, if you want to type it again, because there's been a lot, so I may have missed it. Let's see. We have, how do we talk to 2 to 3-year-olds if they touch themselves without shaming them?
Yeah, you go, oh, you found that it feels good to touch yourself there. Yep, that's yours, and you can do that. What I used to tell my daughter, and I don't tell her anymore because I haven't seen her do it in a while. I'm not saying she's not doing it. I would say make sure that if you touch yourself there, your hands are clean. So you're kind of like, don't go out and play in the mud with the bugs and then come and touch yourself. Make sure your hands are clean. And again, don't do it in front of anyone. That's yours. You do whatever you want with it, but you shouldn't be touching anyone else. And then I would send them, to do it in private in their room. Or I wouldn't send them over, but I would say, if you're needing to do that, that's normal. And you can do it in your room with your door locked, and lock your door. And, I won't come in. I'll knock. If your door is locked, I will know to respect that. Yeah, they should also know to respect your room if the door is closed, and they should knock.
Great, thank you. Well, time just flew by, so we're actually at 11:30. Okay. But I just wanted to end it on one last thing, and I know your last slide kind of talked about it, but if you could reiterate what to do if you do suspect that there's abuse happening.
Sure. Well, again, as mandated reporters, you want to immediately call that in. Something that is something to think about is you can call it into the Child Abuse Protection Hotline. That's okay. That satisfies your legal mandate to report it. I have had cases where law enforcement and even myself, I wish they would have called law enforcement first. Sometimes when CPS comes out, if it is someone in the family and says, oh, there was a report on this and we're trying, did this happen? Did you do that? Whatever. And somebody denies, they sometimes leave the home and now they're gone. They may be in another country, in another state, and they're hard to find. So sometimes I do wish that law enforcement would have been called first, because they may be able to arrest. Sometimes not, but sometimes yes. I think reinforce and say, I'm glad you told me. It's really important that you did that. We're going to take the proper steps to make sure that you are safe and that this doesn't happen to someone else, and go from there. If it's your child or if you're the counselor or the social worker, don't ask too many questions. Enough for you to know, something happened. This isn't okay. And then I would say, bring them to a children's advocacy center, report it. And then we can take care of speaking to the children, gathering the information that we need for CPS investigation and law enforcement investigation. And we will also help with counseling referrals and things like that. But I wouldn't want, it's not helpful for an investigation when someone asks a child very leading questions and the child maybe goes like this, just because children are deferential and they know they need to go like this. And then we are expected to duplicate something that didn't, a question that wasn't asked in a forensically sound manner.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Monica, for the presentation and such important information for everyone to know. And I think there are a few outstanding questions, but unfortunately we have to end. So if your question wasn't answered, you can email me. Mine is, I'll put it in the chat. It's emma.edwards@cirinc.org. And I can either get it to Monica or I can get it to whoever it needs to go to get you an answer. And then I will be sending a follow-up email by this Friday that'll have a certificate of participation, as well as a handout that Monica created that covers how to talk to kids about their bodies. And then lastly, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes, a survey will pop up once you leave this webinar. If you could please fill that out. We use the feedback to improve our trainings and figure out what other trainings we need to offer and things like that. So again, thank you, Monica, and thank you everyone for being on this morning, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.